What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be running through my Week 3 running back rankings. Over the last 2 weeks, I've done both the running back and I think quarterbacks in the same video, but I think moving forward, I'm just going to run through the running backs in one video, wide receivers in another, and then if you guys have questions about, this quarterback, this running back, or like this tight end or this tight end, you guys can just drop those down below. I feel like, the running back and wide receiver ranks are the ones that are probably most important just because everyone typically has one quarterback or one tight end that they go to consistently. So I think that's what we're going to be rolling with going forward. But in this video, we're going to be going through the top 36 running backs, just like a brief look at their matchups. If you guys have any fantasy questions, it could be start sits, it could be waiver wire trade advice. If you drop those down below, I'll make sure to respond to every single person. But let's jump into the rankings. And honestly, I feel like the running back position, especially the top 12, 13, 14 dudes, it's pretty solidified, but there's also a lot of red flags all over the place. Overall, the running back production this year has been pretty brutal. So I think it will improve, but don't get too caught up on if you think a dude, who's ranked 5 should be ranked 3, or a guy who's ranked 4, should be ranked 7. In reality, all these dudes in the top 12 are starting anyway. And we're going to start it off with Christian McCaffrey at number 1. He hasn't had one of those, insane Christian McCaffrey games. He's just been all right so far. I think that'll change coming up. The usage is still there. It's not like he's getting phased out of his workhorse role. Better days are going to be ahead for CMC. I still believe he has the highest ceiling of any fantasy football running back. So he's at number 1. Number 2, I have Jonathan Taylor coming off a down game. But you look at that offense they had with no Michael Pittman, no Alec Pierce. The Colts just looked brutal. Assuming we're getting those dudes back, I still think you can fire up Jonathan Taylor as a high-end RB1. Then at number 3, I do feel like this spot could have gone to a few different players. I still went with Saquon Barkley. Obviously didn't repeat his absolutely insane Week 1 performance, but we can't be expecting that every single week. The usage was still there. He's going up against Dallas, which isn't necessarily a great matchup. We're just going to be betting on the talent here. Saquon Barkley at RB3. Then at RB4, we have DeAndre Swift, another spot that I think could have gone to a few different players. Swift hasn't had elite volume so far this season, but he's just so good on the touches he does get. He has that top receiving upside. This Lions offense is definitely outperforming expectations. He's going up against the Vikings this week. I think he's a mid to high-end RB1. Then at number 5, I actually have Joe Mixon. I think he's a very solid buy low right now if, someone's going to panic after 2 weeks without getting into the end zone. The usage is totally there. He's getting the monster workload. I feel like him and Leonard Fournette are very similar in their current spots. Honestly, they have a ton of similarities, especially the fact that the offenses are underperforming, but both of these units are likely to turn it around, within the next few weeks. Plus, this week he's going up against the Jets. This is a game where I do expect the Bengals to bounce back, go ahead early, and then we could see Joe Mixon just racking up the volume on the ground, just kind of closing that one out. Then at number 6, I have Dalvin Cook. Rough Week 2 performance for sure, but that really just applies to the entire Minnesota Vikings offense. We look back to Week 1, Dalvin Cook had a fantastic workload. It's kind of a trend here we've been seeing where these running backs who have been underperforming, it's really just come down to the fact that they have not gotten into the end zone. Dalvin Cook is one of those guys. He has a solid matchup against the Lions this week. I think he'll put together a nice performance. Right after him, I have Austin Eckler. I know some people are a little bit concerned with Austin Eckler after 2 weeks. To be totally honest with you, I'm a little bit concerned if I drafted him at 3rd overall because he just doesn't have that elite upside this season. I think it's clear he's not getting the goal line work. He doesn't have this elite workhorse role, but I still think he's totally fine to slot in as a mid-tier RB1 play. He will score some touchdowns, right? He's going to get receiving touchdowns. He'll have some breakaway runs, but he's definitely not going to be the elite touchdown scorer he was last year, unless they do drastically kind of shift up the usage here. I guess it makes sense for the Chargers. They get to rest their top running back, put in some bigger-bodied guys on the end zone, but obviously for fantasy, that is tough. This is a game against the Jaguars. Similar to the Mixon situation, they could go ahead early, really use Austin Eckler to kind of seal this one up. Number 8, I have Leonard Fournette going up against the Packers. Like I talked about with Joe Mixon, basically same argument here. He has had a monster workload, just hasn't gotten into the end zone. I think people may think Fournette is going to have this massive game because it looks like they're going to be without Evans, potentially Godwin, potentially Julio. I still think he'll be solid, but I actually think that Fournette would be better off with those guys in the lineup. We've seen over the last 2 weeks when the Bucs have these guys, in and out of the offense, it just doesn't click the same as it did last year. So I think he's probably going to see a lot of volume in this game. The efficiency may not be there, but I still think he's a great start this week. Then at 9, I have Alvin Kamara, another guy who, had a down week 1 performance. You're already seeing some people kind of fade off of him. Alvin Kamara is still locked in as a top 12 running back for me. Going up against the Panthers, I think he'll have a nice bounce back game, assuming he plays. Remember, these guys who are like slightly banged up, going to be questionable, I'm basically going to be ranking them at the spot where if they're healthy, good to go, they would be playing. So if we get updated news on Friday, Saturday, saying, Alvin Kamara is going to be limited, James Conner is going to be limited, then we reevaluate. But I feel like it's easier for me to just rank them as if they're healthy, and then we pivot if they are not actually healthy. Then at number 10, I have Derrick Henry, another guy kind of off to a slow start here. I have some level of concern for Derrick Henry just because this offense as a whole has not been good. The O-line does not look good. Without A.J. Brown, all the focus is on Derrick Henry here. I see people saying, should I be selling him, all this stuff. I still don't think he's a sell because if you're selling him at a shell of his former price. I think if you were going to sell, you've come up with the idea that you don't like the situation. You wait until he has one of his classic Derrick Henry 150-yard, 2-touchdown games, and then you move him. Don't sell him after 2 down performances. You're just kind of burning the value on him. But I still think he's a top 12 running back this week. Then I have Najee Harris here at number 11. Another guy with 2 underwhelming weeks to start off. It's definitely a trend here. The volume is still there. He'll be, 1 week back from that ankle injury. So I like Najee Harris as a back-end RB1. At number 12, I have Nick Chubb going up against the Steelers. Nick Chubb is really one of the only running backs who's had a fantastic start to the season, and the main reason for that is 3 touchdowns in 2 games. He definitely draws a tough matchup here against the Steelers. I've talked about this in a few different videos. I think this game is going to be gross. I think it's going to be a grinded-out performance between the Steelers and the Browns, likely low scoring. So I'm not, overly optimistic on Nick Chubb here, but it's also probably not going to be a game script where he gets phased out for Kareem Hunt. So some pros and some cons there. Then at 13, I have Javonte Williams. It definitely seems like Javonte is going to slowly start phasing Melvin Gordon out of the offense. It would be nice if the offense would look better as a unit. That would really bump up Javonte Williams' ceiling. But right now, this is where he's going to be sitting. Then at 14, I have Aaron Jones coming off a monster Week 2 performance. You may be wondering why he is not higher, and the reason for that is he is going up against the very tough Tampa Bay Buccaneers run defense. I think I talked about this in the QB start sit, but I think when you hear, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Buccaneers, Packers, you're expecting this massive shootout. The gunslingers are going to be going at it. This could be kind of, I don't want to say low scoring, but I feel like this could be a grind when we're looking at, the Packers offense, which hasn't necessarily clicked. The weapons are obviously lacking. Then you look at the Buccaneers, going to be without Mike Evans, potentially Chris Godwin, potentially Julio Jones. They have issues on the offensive line. I feel like this may be, a little bit more low scoring than we're expecting, but Aaron Jones has a tough matchup, but we still know he's going to be involved. Plus, he can get work through the air. So he's, a high-end RB2 for me. That leads us into James Conner, another guy dealing with an injury here. Well, who else did I talk about like that? It was Alvin Kamara. So James Conner, if he's good to go, 100%, this is where I have him. His workload has been really solid this year. I sound like a broken record, but the workload has been solid. The touchdowns just have not come. I think he scored 1 in week 1, and also this offense just hasn't been clicking, so the efficiency has been lacking. But I'm still very confident in James Conner moving forward. 16, I have David Montgomery. Definitely think this is a great matchup for Montgomery. It's probably one of the only games all season the Bears are going to be favored in, going up against the Texans, so that means he's going to be in the game script. Well, to be honest, they were down to the Packers, and he was still somehow heavy in the game script. So I guess, they're going to keep handing him the ball no matter what the score is, but it definitely helps if they're ahead or, somewhat in a close competitive matchup. So I like Montgomery here as a high-end RB2. At 17, I have Antonio Gibson going up against the Eagles. Tougher matchup. I do think it's possible this Washington offense comes back down to earth, but I definitely think there's a huge fall off from Montgomery to Gibson here. So it's not necessarily like, oh, I love Gibson here at number 17. It's just that I think there's a fall off, and Gibson's probably the top option in this next tier. After Gibson, I have A.J. Dillon. Dillon would normally be higher in a more standard matchup, but like I talked about for Aaron Jones, this is definitely a tough matchup against the Buccaneers, so he's going to slot in at RB 18. I have Josh Jacobs here at 19 going up against the Titans. Jacobs has had a solid workload. It's kind of been similar to the James Conner situation where the workload hasn't translated to efficiency and top production just because the offenses haven't started out super hot. I think this Raiders offense will come around. It could be the game against the Titans that kind of sparks that. So he's going to be my RB 19. Then I have CEH coming in at RB 20. I think CEH is a very safe back-end RB2 play. Going up against the Colts, he's not going to have crazy volume, but the efficiency is going to be there. He'll have touchdown opportunities on a high-scoring offense. 21, I have Kareem Hunt, another guy who's pretty firmly locked in here as a back-end RB2. He's going to be getting the work behind Nick Chubb, going to be getting the majority of that receiving work, so I like him at this spot. Another guy in this tier, I feel like all these dudes are just chunked together. Miles Sanders going up against the Commanders, another dude who's not going to have a huge workload, but he's going to be pretty efficient on a very solid rushing attack with the Eagles, has looked good through 2 weeks, so I like Sanders there. Then I've got Jeff Wilson at number 23, going up against the Broncos. Not a great matchup, but I do think Trey Lance getting injured really does help Jeff Wilson here, because originally I wasn't super high on Jeff Wilson. I didn't think he was a start last week when Lance was healthy, and the problem was I'm looking at that offense. They don't really pass to the running backs, and so Jeff Wilson would need to rely on touchdowns to, really be a startable asset. And then I'm looking at this offense, and you've got Deebo Samuel vulturing carries, especially, near the goal line, the high value touches. You also have Trey Lance vulturing those opportunities. Now it's Jimmy G. You just have to worry about Deebo Samuel. So I definitely like Jeff Wilson a lot more, with Jimmy G under center. 24, I have Ezekiel Elliott. I felt like I could have gone even lower this one. He goes up against the Giants. Just a bad start for Zeke. The problem really just comes from the Dak injury. If Dak was healthy and this was a solid offense, with not a ton of pressure on the run game, Zeke could be giving you decent workload and getting touchdown opportunities. The problem is he doesn't have the receiving work, and then they're not scoring touchdowns, so it's definitely hurting Zeke's fantasy usage. I've seen some people talking about selling him. I feel like at this point he's a hold, because if you're selling him, you're just going to, unless someone's going to pay pre-season price tag. But I feel like at this point, you're not going to be able to get much back for him. And then he's probably going to be peaking in, 3-4 weeks when Dak Prescott gets back. So it may suck if you have him, but I do feel like it's probably best to keep him at this point, unless someone will overpay for the big name. After Zeke, I have Cordell Patterson at 25. There are definitely some concerns here with Patterson, starting off with the fact that he had a 50-50 split of the carries with Tyler Algier, and then the fact that he couldn't really have a solid workload in the receiving game. Drake London went nuclear, so you could say, London's targets go down, Patterson's go up, but then in the same game, Pitts was kind of phased out, so it's like, it's going to be a low-volume passing attack. We've got to support Drake London and Kyle Pitts. I firmly believe those two are better pass catchers than Patterson. So it's like, how big is this role going to be for him? I still think he's a fringe running back too. I think he's startable, but he definitely doesn't have that week one upside if there's a healthy RB2 behind him. At 26, I have Dameon Pierce. He's going up against the Bears. I do normally like to avoid this archetype of running back, a guy who's going to be getting, a carry-heavy workload on a bad offense, because they just seem like a lock to give you 15 carries for 70 yards, which in terms of real-life NFL is pretty solid, but 7 fantasy points really isn't going to cut it. They can also get kind of pushed out of the game script if they go down early. But like I talked about with David Montgomery, this is probably going to be one of the only games for the Texans where they're really locked in, in a competitive game. I guess they've done it the last 2 weeks, but if we're being realistic here, they're probably going to be getting blown out a decent number of matchups. So I do like Pierce here. I think he's going to have that solid workload on the ground. I think he has a solid opportunity to get into the end zone as well. Then at 27, I have Darrell Henderson, and I really don't know how to evaluate this Rams backfield. After week 1, it looked like Akers was just out of the picture, and it looked like Henderson was going to be the guy. Then week 2, they go out. I believe they actually gave Akers more opportunities. Henderson was more efficient in his touches and got the touchdown. So right now, I do think Henderson is the better option, and I think he does have the ceiling where if you throw him in there, I wouldn't be surprised if he just somehow regained 70% of the backfield. But if you're playing him at RB27 and this turns into a direct 50-50 split again, then he's probably not living up to expectations, or maybe they just give Cam Akers the workload. It is tough to trust this Rams backfield, but this is kind of the risk-reward we're playing here of having him as a high-end RB3. 28, I have James Robinson. Some people may think Robinson should be higher, and just hear me out here. The reason why I do have him here at RB28, I think this is a bad matchup for James Robinson's role in this offense. He definitely is the RB1. Don't get me wrong. I was in on ETN. I've definitely taken that L so far. ETN has not been a good pick. But going up against the Chargers, I expect the Chargers to probably go up early in this game. And I do still believe the Jaguars view ETN as their receiving back. At worst, probably, it'll be like a 50-50 split of the receiving work with ETN and James Robinson. So I'm just saying this isn't going to be a great game script for James Robinson where he's going to be able to, run it out at the end of the game like he did last week against the Colts. So I would just temper expectations there with J-Rob. 29 and 30, I have back-to-back Patriots running backs, Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris. Damian Harris definitely had the fantasy points last week, but I do think the usage and, the snap counts, the receiving workload, all of that pointed to Ramondre Stevenson, in my opinion, as the better option moving forward. So they are back-to-back, but I do favor Ramondre here. Then at 31, I have Tony Pollard getting the receiving work in this Cowboys offense. A pretty gross backfield at this point, but it's someone that I do think is actually startable. Maybe he's in your flex option, your RB2, on a weaker running back team. I think it's fine. At 32, I do have Travis Etienne. Like I said, if it's not a great, game script for James Robinson, Travis Etienne could be the beneficiary of that. I don't love him as a start, but he's someone where it's like if you're really desperate, maybe you toss him in there. Then I've got Michael Carter at 33 going up against the Bengals. Not a guy I want in my lineup. This has been a pretty gross split, but that's where he's coming in. 34, Chase Edmonds against the Bills. Unfortunate what this Dolphins backfield has turned into. I actually have Mostert right behind him. It looks like Mostert's going to be getting a lot of the early down work. Edmonds is going to be getting the third down work in an offense that is so concentrated on getting Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle the ball. It's tough to see either of these guys being super confident starts unless they have fantastic matchups like they're going up against the Jets or, another team where you can count on them going up early. So at this point against the Bills, you prefer Edmonds because they may be down, getting some third down opportunities, but don't love either dude this week. And then to wrap up the top 36, I have Breece Hall. Still love the talent, still like him long term, but at this point he's definitely behind Michael Carter. And then three guys who didn't make the list, we have Cam Akers, Devin Singletary, and Melvin Gordon. Just guys who were on the fringe and, players who could have slotted in one of those last spots. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 36 running backs. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'll be posting the wide receiver rankings today. And then like I said at the top, any questions, drop those down below. Thank you guys again, and I'll see you in the next one.